They took my room. Just like that. One day it was mine, the next it was handed over to my cousin like I was invisible. You won't believe what I did next, because I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I'm Jessica, 22 years old, and what happened that summer was hands down one of the worst family visits I've ever endured. It started out like any normal weekend. My parents were bustling around, trying to make everything perfect for my cousin's arrival. She was supposed to stay with us for just a few weeks, they said. I was excited at first, after all, family meant something to me. But nothing prepared me for what was about to unfold. The day she arrived, the air in the house felt different, thicker somehow, like tension had quietly slipped into the corners while I wasn't paying attention. I remember walking upstairs after unpacking my things, looking forward to collapsing on my bed, but then I stopped cold. There, taped on my bedroom door, was a small, neatly folded note. The paper was white, the handwriting familiar, my mom's, but the message was anything but warm. It said simply, Jessica's room is now reserved for, cousin's name. Please use the guest room. I stared at that note, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it downstairs. The words blurred in front of my eyes. How could they just decide this? No heads up, no conversation, no, hey, Jess, we might need you to switch rooms for a while. Just a cold little piece of paper acting like it was the law of the land. Fury bubbled up inside me, hot and wild. My jaw clenched, my hands trembling slightly, but I forced myself to breathe slow and steady. I wasn't going to explode right there. Not yet. I folded the note carefully, trying to keep my voice steady when I called down to my mom. Hey, did you really mean for, cousin, to take my room? There was a pause. Then, with that kind of calm that feels like a wall, she replied, yes, honey. It's just for a few weeks. The guest room will be fine. Okay, I said, trying to keep the hurt and disbelief out of my voice. But inside, I felt invisible. Like my feelings didn't even matter. I wanted to yell, to stomp my feet, to scream, but instead, I swallowed it down and nodded to myself. For now, I would keep my cool. But I couldn't shake the cold pit growing in my stomach, the sense that something important was slipping away from me, something I wasn't sure I'd get back. At first, I genuinely tried to be reasonable. I kept telling myself this was just a temporary arrangement, something fleeting that would soon pass. After all, family comes first, right? So, I told myself to be patient. Maybe it was just for a night or two, just a few days, and then I'd get my room back. With that hope clinging to me like a fragile thread, I packed a small overnight bag, stuffed it with essentials, and prepared myself mentally for the couch that was about to become my new sleeping spot. The living room wasn't made for resting, it was drafty and cold at night, the cushions never quite soft enough to ease the soreness in my bones, but I pushed those discomforts to the back of my mind. I told myself it was fine, because what choice did I really have? Those first few mornings I woke up with an ache that wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, more gnawing, an ache that settled in my chest like a heavy stone. The ache came from feeling pushed aside, invisible in a house that was supposed to be my home. Every muscle in my body ached, but the dull, persistent ache in my heart was the worst. It was as though the people who should have been my anchors, my support system, had suddenly decided I was no longer part of the equation. It was as if overnight, my presence was unwelcome and my feelings unimportant. The absolute worst part wasn't the uncomfortable couch, nor the unfamiliar creaks of the living room at night. No, the worst part was how completely normal everyone acted about the whole situation. My parents behaved as though handing over my room to my cousin was a natural and expected thing to do. Like it was just an ordinary, no big deal kind of thing. There were no whispered apologies, no hesitant looks of regret. Instead, I was met with casual, almost dismissive attitudes that cut deeper than any angry words could have. When I tried to address it, when I finally summoned the courage to bring it up and say how much it hurt, how unfair it felt, they brushed me off like I was being unreasonable. It's only for a little while, they'd say, their voices calm but cold. You need to be more understanding, Jess. That phrase, more understanding, was like a bitter punch to my gut. It wasn't understanding they wanted from me, it was compliance. Silence. Submission. I began to wonder if they ever actually cared about how I felt. Did they see me as little more than a guest in my own house, some visitor who could be shuffled aside when convenient? Because every interaction made me feel less like a daughter and more like an intruder. One afternoon, I found myself standing near the kitchen doorway, watching them, my parents and my cousin, laughing and chatting as if everything was perfectly normal. They didn't even notice me standing there, on the edge of the room, an invisible spectator to a family scene where I no longer belonged. That's when it hit me, cold and hard, like a slap across my face. This wasn't about space. It wasn't about logistics or convenience. No, this was about control. My parents wanted to show me exactly who was boss. They wanted to make it crystal clear that my cousin was their new favorite, the golden child for the duration of her stay. And me? I was the forgotten one, the daughter who could be ignored and sidelined without consequence. Every time I tried to speak up, I was shut down. Told to be more understanding again, as if my feelings were a nuisance or a childish complaint. But inside, a storm was building. The anger inside me wasn't just simmering, it was raging, a fierce tempest that I struggled to hide beneath forced smiles and quiet words. Passing by my old room became a moment I dreaded each day. I'd stop in the hallway and freeze, heart hammering, because there she was, my cousin, lounging on my bed like she owned the place. The furniture was exactly the same, the posters I had painstakingly put up still clung to the walls. But the energy? The atmosphere had shifted completely. The warmth and memories that once filled that space felt like they'd been erased, replaced by something cold and unwelcoming, like my existence in that room had been wiped clean. It was as though all the moments, all the pieces of me that had made that space home, were suddenly strangers. I knew I couldn't let this continue, feeling powerless, overlooked, silenced. I needed a plan, but what could I do? I felt trapped in a cage with no key. Powerless in the house I'd called home my entire life. And yet, somewhere deep inside, something clicked, a spark of defiance flickered to life, lighting up the darkness. I realized I didn't have to stay a victim. I could turn the tables. So, one night, actually, it was past midnight when the whole house finally sank into the kind of silence that feels almost sacred, I found myself wide awake, tangled in a mess of restless thoughts that refused to let me sleep. The soft tick of the wall clock was the only sound breaking the stillness, a constant reminder that I was alone in the house, alone in my feelings, and more than anything, alone in this silent war I hadn't chosen but was now forced to fight. I lay there on the couch, the springs creaking beneath me, a dull ache from hours of restless tossing settling deep into my bones, but more than the physical discomfort was this cold ache of invisibility that wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. That night, something inside me shifted. I realized yelling or pleading would only feed their dismissal, their belief that I was overreacting or making a fuss where none was needed. They didn't want to hear me raise my voice, they wanted silence. So instead of giving them what they wanted, I decided to fight in a way they wouldn't expect. Not with anger or loud confrontations, but with quiet persistence. With little acts that said, I'm still here. I matter. This is my home. I got up quietly, slipping on my slippers as I tiptoed through the darkened hallway. The moonlight spilled softly through the windows, casting long, gentle shadows across the walls, my walls, even if my family had tried to claim otherwise. I carried with me a small stack of sticky notes and a few photographs I'd hidden away months ago in a drawer, dusty and forgotten, but filled with memories I wasn't ready to let go of. I had pens, too, bright colors that felt like little bursts of rebellion against the dullness that had settled over everything. I started small. The first note went on the living room coffee table, right next to the spot where my mom always sipped her morning tea. I wrote in careful, neat handwriting, "This is where I told you my dreams." As I placed it down, I imagined my mom waking up the next day, groggy and half asleep, her eyes landing on that note and the flood of memories rushing back. I pictured her fingers curling around her warm mug, a flicker of recognition crossing her face, maybe even a hint of guilt. From there, I moved to the kitchen, where my dad usually grabbed his cereal bowl before rushing out the door. I stuck a small, slightly worn photo of us together on a fishing trip years ago onto the refrigerator door. The photo was faded, edges curled, but our smiles were as bright as ever. Beneath it, I wrote, "The catch we celebrated, together." I wanted them to remember those moments of joy, before things became fractured, before I became invisible. Every step I took through the house felt heavy with emotion. The floorboards creaked under my feet, echoing in the quiet house, and the faint smell of lavender air freshener mixed with the lingering scent of dinner still hanging in the kitchen. I found myself hesitating outside the bathroom door, the same bathroom where I had spent hours growing up, singing badly and talking to my reflection like it was a trusted friend. With a shaky breath, I taped a note to the mirror, "This is where I learned to be myself." Then came the hardest part, standing in the hallway outside my old bedroom. My heart hammered painfully in my chest as I stared at the door that now bore my cousin's name. The posters I'd spent years collecting still clung to the walls inside, but the life had gone out of that room. I placed a photo of my childhood bedroom, walls plastered with band posters, colorful art, and fairy lights, next to the door and wrote beneath it, "This is where I grew up. This is where I belong." It wasn't just about leaving reminders. No, it was about making my family feel what it was like to lose something important, something they'd taken for granted until it was gone. It was a silent message, woven through the house like a thread only we could see, binding me back to the home they'd tried to claim from me. Over the next few days, the effect was subtle but undeniable. I'd catch my mom pausing by the living room table, her eyes lingering on the note longer than necessary. My dad, usually distracted and hurried, found himself staring at the photo on the fridge, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with some distant memory. My cousin, the uninvited occupant of my room, began to move through the house with a hesitant, almost guilty air, glancing nervously at the notes she'd tried to ignore. One evening, from across the kitchen doorway, I overheard my parents' hushed conversation. Their voices were low, tinged with something that sounded like regret and realization. "I didn't realize how much this would hurt Jess," my mom admitted quietly, her voice trembling just a bit. "Yeah," my dad replied softly. "We didn't mean to, but we forgot what this house means to her." Hearing those words felt like a fragile victory. My chest tightened with a mixture of hope and sadness. It was a start, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The notes had cracked open the silence, but the story was far from over. What would come next? That, I still didn't know. Slowly. That word doesn't even begin to capture the glacial pace at which the atmosphere in our house started to change. It was more like a whisper than a shout, an almost imperceptible shift that crept in quietly, like the first faint rays of dawn brushing the edges of a long, dark night. The house that had felt cold and indifferent, where my presence had been shrugged off and overlooked, began to stir with a new, fragile awareness. At first, I noticed it in the smallest of details. My parents, who had barely acknowledged the notes I'd left scattered like breadcrumbs through the house, started to pause when they came across them. My mom's hand would hover over a note on the living room table for an extra heartbeat, her fingers brushing lightly over the paper as if she were trying to absorb something beyond the ink. My dad, who was usually distracted and preoccupied, lingered longer than usual by the fridge, staring down at the faded photo I'd pinned there with a look I hadn't seen in years, a mixture of nostalgia, regret, and something almost like longing. There was a new tension in the air, a charged energy that made the walls feel less like barriers and more like witnesses to something shifting beneath the surface. I caught my parents exchanging glances, subtle but loaded with meaning. Those quick, almost secret looks said everything without a single word spoken: confession, realization, maybe even a touch of shame. It was as if the notes I'd left, those quiet reminders of my presence and my pain, had begun to penetrate the fog of indifference they'd wrapped themselves in. My cousin, the very person who had so comfortably settled into what used to be my room, was the most telling sign of all. Where once she had moved through the house with the assuredness of someone who believed she owned every inch, now she seemed different. I caught her hesitating by the doorway of that room more than once, her confident smile faltering just enough to reveal a flicker of unease. There were moments when her eyes would dart nervously toward the bathroom mirror or the hallway wall, where my notes clung like quiet accusations. I swear I saw a flash of guilt cross her face when she thought I wasn't watching. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the kitchen in a soft golden light, I stood just beyond the doorway, keeping myself hidden. I could hear my parents talking in low, careful voices, words that felt heavy with unspoken emotions. My mom's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her fingers twitching nervously, while my dad leaned forward, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away a stubborn headache. "I think we've been blind," my mom said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of realization. Blind to how much this meant to Jess. To how much it hurt her. My dad nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the worn kitchen table. "It's not just a room, is it? It's more than that. It's her sanctuary. Her memories. Her whole world." The words hit me like a warm breath on a cold day, a fragile thread of hope weaving its way through the heaviness in my chest. At last, they were beginning to understand. The space they dismissed as just a bedroom was so much more. It was a part of me, an extension of my life and my identity. And no amount of ignoring or erasing could change that. Days passed, each one stretching long and slow, until finally the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. My parents came to me, their steps hesitant and uncertain, as if they were stepping into a room they weren't quite sure they belonged in anymore. Their faces were flushed with a mix of embarrassment and hope, two emotions I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. "Jessica," my mom began, her voice softer than it had been in weeks, almost fragile, "we're sorry. We didn't realize how much this was hurting you." My dad nodded in agreement, his tone quiet but sincere. "We want to make it right. We've been thoughtless, and we're sorry." I looked at them, really looked, and saw something new in their eyes, remorse, yes, but also a genuine desire to fix what they'd broken. For so long, I had felt invisible, like my feelings were background noise in the soundtrack of their lives. But here, in this quiet, vulnerable moment, they were finally seeing me, not just as their daughter, but as a person with a space, a life, and a history that deserved respect. It wasn't an instant fix. The cracks in our relationship ran deep, and I knew healing would take time. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt heard. I felt seen. And that made all the difference. That fragile beginning, the first hesitant step toward rebuilding what had been broken, was the start of something new. In the end, I got my room back. It might sound like a simple resolution, a neat little ending to a chapter that had been painfully dragging on, but the truth was far more complex than that. Opening that door again felt like stepping into a space that had been sealed off from me, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The faint scent of lavender from the air freshener, mingling with the delicate undertones of vanilla from the candle I'd left burning in a rare moment of calm, greeted me like an old friend. It was familiar and comforting, yet it also carried a bittersweet reminder of what had been taken from me, and what I had fought to reclaim. The sunlight poured softly through the half-closed curtains, draping the room in a warm, golden glow. It cast delicate shadows that danced lightly across the faded posters on the walls, posters of bands and movies and quotes that had shaped my teenage years and whispered the dreams I had long held close. The carpet beneath my feet was worn but inviting, and as I took slow, deliberate steps, I could almost hear the faint creak of the floorboards, a sound so intimately familiar that it felt like the heartbeat of the room itself. Standing there, surrounded by the things that had once been undeniably mine, I felt a swell of emotions rise up inside me. Relief, yes, but also a profound sense of reclaiming something far more vital than just a physical space. I realized, in that quiet, almost sacred moment, that I had reclaimed my voice. For so long, I had been silenced, not because I lacked words, but because no one had chosen to hear me. My feelings had been dismissed like whispers in a storm, my presence overlooked as if I were nothing more than a shadow in the background of my own home. And yet, my voice had never truly disappeared. It had been there all along, waiting patiently beneath the surface, growing stronger with every quiet act of resistance. What struck me most deeply was how I hadn't needed to shout or scream to be heard. I hadn't needed to storm the house with rage or tears. Instead, I had discovered a different kind of strength, one born from quiet persistence and deliberate subtlety. Sometimes, the most powerful voice isn't the loudest. Sometimes, it's the one that refuses to be erased, that holds its ground calmly and steadily until those who tried to silence it have no choice but to listen. This experience taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. The best kind of revenge, the kind that leaves a lasting mark, isn't about loud confrontations or emotional outbursts. It's not about forcing people to notice you through anger or pain. The best revenge is far more nuanced. It's about quietly reminding people what they've been missing, about holding on to your dignity and your truth in a way that silently demands recognition. It's about making those who took your space think twice about what they assumed was theirs for the taking. Watching my family begin to see me again was a slow process, like dawn breaking gently after a long, dark night. They started looking at me differently, not just as the girl who lived in their house, but as a person with feelings, memories, and an undeniable right to her own space. The way they looked at me softened over time, becoming more thoughtful, tinged with regret and understanding. It was as if they were waking from a deep slumber, finally realizing the depth of what they'd overlooked. And that realization, painful though it was for all of us, felt infinitely more satisfying than any angry shouting match ever could. There's a quiet, almost indescribable satisfaction in knowing that you don't have to fight with noise and fury to make yourself heard. There's strength in silence, in quiet resilience, in the steady assertion of your worth without yelling or demanding. Reclaiming my room was more than just reclaiming a physical place, it was reclaiming my identity, my space in the world, and my right to be seen and respected. So yes, I got my room back. But even more than that, I got myself back. I found my voice again, not the loud, desperate kind, but the steady, confident one that carries through the silence. And that made all the difference, more than words, more than walls, more than anything else.